Amazing. Thank you so much to everybody for joining this Friends of the British Overseas Territories event. Today, I'm super excited for us to get involved in this conversation. We're going to be talking a bit about conservation in the British Overseas Territories and exactly what that looks like. The UK overseas territories are a fantastic and diverse set of islands, as we all know, but the question of how we can actually protect their fragile environments and their species continues to be a question that we don't necessarily always know the answer to. So my name is Reem Ibrahim, and I am the events coordinator and spokesperson here at the Friends of the British Overseas Territories, or FOTBOT is our acronym. If you've got any questions throughout the entire event, pop them into the chat box and we will be able to answer them at the end. Joining me today for this fantastic webinar is the wonderful Amdeep Sangera, who is from the Marine Conservation Society. The Marine Conservation Society's UK Overseas Territories Conservation Officer is his title. So for over 20 years, the Marine Conservation Society have been working in the Caribbean UK Overseas Territories on species conservation. Their key focus now is actually supporting their Caribbean partners in significantly improving the management of their existing marine protected areas, so the MPA networks. So we're going to be hearing from Amdeep about their current conservation projects as well as all of their future endeavours. And I'm super excited to hear all about that. So Amdeep, without further ado, you can take it away and you can share your screen.
All right. Well, thank you, Reem, and Friends of the British Overseas Territories for inviting me to give this talk, and for everyone that's given up their time to hear this talk. So I'm just going to share my screen right now. Are people seeing the screen?
Yeah, we can see the screen.
Okay, I'm just gonna. There you go. So as Reem said, I work for the Marine Conservation Society as their UK Overseas Territories Conservation Officer. And I've had the absolute pleasure of working in the Caribbean territories since 2008. And, there is a lot of conservation work that is going on in the territories, as I'm sure you know. So this is just one perspective, basically, of the type of work that we're doing. So I'm from the Marine Conservation Society. So we're essentially a UK-based charity, really fighting for cleaner, better protected and healthier oceans, ones that we can all enjoy, just like those people in that picture right there. And we actually have an arm of work which is all about ocean recovery. And that is where the Caribbean UK Overseas Territories work sits. And our work in the Caribbean Overseas Territories, it started in 2002, basically. It was a UK government-funded study to assess the status and conservation of marine turtles in all 5 of the Caribbean territories. I then joined in 2008 when the Turks and Caicos Islands government took on the recommendations from that initial project in 2002 and basically initiated a full-scale project to understand their turtle fishery and turtle conservation. And that's where I came in. And so basically, just very quickly, this Turks and Caicos Islands Turtle Project is really a flagship project of ours. So it had scientific aspects to it. We were flipper tagging and recapturing marine turtles in the wild. I, along with departmental staff from the government of the Turks and Caicos Islands, were assessing the turtle fishery as well. We also were doing satellite tracking to try and better understand the movements, the residential kind of habits, the migratory habits of turtles that reside in TCI waters. And complementing this science, our expertise really is stakeholder engagement, and we use the community voice method, which is the documentary film method which reaches deep into communities, tries to understand their needs, their beliefs, their kind of ambitions regarding a certain issue. For example, in this case, it was to do with turtles and their management. And we then show that film across the islands to gather wider stakeholder input. And that is then amalgamated with the biological sciences to develop a conservation plan that hopefully is not only good for the species in question, in this case turtles, but for the community too. And from this project, the Turks and Caicos Islands, we've now expanded where we're working pretty much across all of the 5 Caribbean overseas territories. And it's not just turtles, it's sharks and habitats. But really, I think a key thing of our work is that we ensure that those local views, opinions, and values of the communities that we work with and that are most likely going to be affected by conservation interventions, they've got a seat at the table and their voices are combined with the science to make the conservation solution holistic. Okay. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of people know about the UK overseas territories, but just to be sure, here's a map of the Caribbean, and there are the 4 Caribbean overseas territories where we work. The other Caribbean territory is Cayman Islands. We don't work there on the ground, but we do support them working with the UK government on the Bluebelt program. So in the Turks and Caicos Islands, British Virgin Islands and Montserrat, we run marine turtle projects with the University of Exeter and local partners, including NGOs and governments. And in Anguilla, we've got a current shark conservation project happening right now. But this presentation is all going to be about the sea turtle work that we do in the Caribbean UK overseas territories. So I just thought I'd give a very quick overview of sea turtles before we start going into the nature of the work. So as you may know, sea turtles, they're air-breathing reptiles and they're long-lived. They can take up to 20-30 years to actually mature, but once they get to that maturity stage, they can go on to live up to 70, 80, 90 years old if allowed to. And they've also got really complex life cycles, which we've started to really understand in the last couple of decades with the fantastic science that's been evolving. And these involve huge migrations. They involve a lot of time spent in what were known as home territories, especially adult turtles and those teenage turtles. And then we know that their turtles do these epic migrations, can be hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles back to their natal breeding grounds to breed. And so what sea turtles do we have in the Caribbean and in the Caribbean UK overseas territories? Well, there are 4 species in the Caribbean. You've got the green turtles, hawksbills, leatherbacks, and loggerheads. And at the bottom, you'll see there's 2 other species. These are the Ridley turtles, the Kemp Ridleys and the Olive Ridleys. You don't really get them in the Caribbean. If you do, they're probably just, they're very rare passerbys. You normally get them in the Gulf of Mexico and North America and South America. Okay, this is a green turtle, so named for the color of its fat, and they're actually herbivores, and you'll generally find them on seagrass beds, like this juvenile green turtle in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And you can really see like where green turtles have been, because you can almost see that the seagrass has been cropped by the green turtle's kind of teeth and jaws. So if you're ever swimming across a seagrass bed and you kind of notice that the seagrass has been almost just like harvested or I should say almost mown, stick around because you might actually see a few green turtles. And the Caribbean UK overseas territories are really endowed with these seagrass habitats, including wetlands as well. Here's a picture of Middle Caicos and East Caicos in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Ideal habitats, seagrass, lagoonal habitat for juvenile and subadult sea turtles to reside. And not just in the Turks and Caicos Islands, but in many of our UK overseas territories in the Caribbean, you've got similar habitats that are supporting green turtles. At the same time, you have a lot of reef structures as well. And this is another island in the Turks and Caicos Islands called Grand Turk. And wherever you get like reef mosaics like we have here, that's where you generally find hawksbill turtles, which is on your screen now. Unfortunately, these have been historically hunted for their stunning shells. But you can generally find them on reefs eating small sponges, and it's not hard and fast rule. Sometimes you find hawksbills on seagrass beds, sometimes you find green turtles on reefs as well. And as you can kind of see in that photo, you can kind of see the seagrass almost bordering the reef. So you can kind of see these habitats a lot of the times they create these mosaics. The next turtle, the leatherback, which nests in the BBI and Anguilla. I mean, really, this is the real kind of mariner of the turtle world. You don't really see these turtles in shallow kind of coastal waters. They're in the deep pelagic seas. I mean, they can weigh up to like 950 kilograms. They can dive up to like 1,100 meters, and they are the most widely distributed marine turtle there is. They're absolutely fascinating creatures. And the other turtle is the loggerhead turtle, so known for its huge head, as you can kind of see here. And they use that to crush clams, shellfish, lobsters, conchs. That's their main food. And generally, there's big nesting populations in Florida. There's also big nesting populations in South America. So really, whenever you see the loggerheads, invariably, they're mostly just passing through. So next, I'm going to talk a bit about the kind of scientific research which has been happening in the region, and just to give you a sense of how well these species are doing in the Caribbean. So the first one is the hawksbill, and that's critically endangered. And these are nesting graphs, basically, nesting densities. And those 5 graphs are of nesting beaches in Mexico. And you can kind of see they're quite variable. They're up and down. But that graph on the bottom right, you can kind of see the number of nests peaks at 2006. Sorry, this is in the US Virgin Islands. And then their nesting populations kind of go down. So the hawksbill in the Caribbean, its nesting populations are variable, as you can kind of see. And we're not talking thousands of nests here, we're talking hundreds. And that's why it's critically endangered. Okay, the next species is the leatherback, and let's have a look how they're doing in terms of nesting wise. So in Florida, as you can kind of see, their nests have been doing pretty well, actually. They started off quite low in the late 80s, but they've had a bit of they're recovering now. There's a bit of dip in 2017, but they're looking at about 500 nests a year. But if you look at one of the bigger rookeries for leatherbacks in the Western Atlantic, French Guiana, while they were doing pretty well in about 2008 and 9, they've plummeted there. And there really is an issue with leatherbacks. We're not sure exactly what's happening with the populations, if it's variable food such as jellyfish, or if there's other kind of threats, potentially bycatch. We're not sure, but there's certainly an issue that needs looking at. And they're globally endangered as well and declining. However, the green turtles are doing really well. So the top graph is nesting, number of nests in Florida, and you can kind of see that that's about 30,000 nests a year recently, with a peak of about 40,000 a few years ago. And also in Mexico, you can see that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of nests there, and the bottom graph is Costa Rica as well. It's interesting to kind of see that Mexico and Costa Rica do seem to be having a downward trend or a tapering off, as does happen in populations of wildlife. They can't always keep that kind of level of growth. A lot of it is to do with their habitats and the density of those habitats and how much they can support. But regardless, You know, there are in this region there are millions of green turtle hatchlings that are crawling out of nests in these locations and finding their way into the deep sea, and then coming back to reside in the Caribbean, including the Caribbean overseas territories, where the swathes of seagrasses and wetlands are ideal habitat for them to grow and mature. And in the Caribbean, green turtles are least concern. Yeah, so they're doing pretty well. Okay. So I just mentioned those green turtles. You know, when they actually hatch out of the nest, they invariably go into the deep sea, the oceanic gyre in the Atlantic, where there's very few predators, and they're basically in mats of sargassum. They get to about a dinner-sized plate, and they then come back into the coastal shores. But however, there are a lot of threats affecting turtles and their survivability. Excuse me. And the first one is habitat degradation. And so this is a photo taken of a juvenile green turtle in the British Virgin Islands. And you can kind of see it's a severely degraded reef habitat. And a lot of that has been caused by climate change, bleaching, rising sea temperatures, hurricanes, also kind of destructive fishing practices as well. But so that's a definite issue, as well as development on land as well, with that kind of detritus washing into the sea when it rains and kind of forms a layer over the reefs, can also be very damaging as well to water quality too. And as these turtles do get bigger, they'll start nesting on beaches. And for that, they need to be dark and quiet, so the turtles don't get afraid and you know, potentially abandon their nests. But what we do see in the territories in the Caribbean and wider afield is that there's a lot of development happening, and this can be linked to tourism as well, be it resorts, and not only on land developments. There's port terminals and cruise ship terminals. So yeah, this is a real threat to the habitats that these turtles need, essentially. And big one, which I kind of mentioned before, is climate change. So the sex of turtles are actually determined by temperature, and we think it's about 29 degrees. It's the kind of balance point. If the temperatures in the actual nest of the beach increase over 29, then you start to get more females, so a feminization of the population. If it's less than 29 degrees, you get a skewed male population. But with our warming world, we are now starting to see in other parts of the world marine turtle populations heavily skewed to females. And I think there was a study in Australia where a lot of the hatchlings that were coming out of these beaches, these nests, were like almost 99% female. So what can we do? Well, we essentially need to protect this matrix of habitats, be it the beaches, seagrass beds, reefs, wetlands, and only through that, with close consultation with communities, because we understand that these habitats are vital to blue economies and the fisheries of Caribbean territory communities. I think developing plans, only through that then do you start to build resilience in your habitats against climate change and the ever-increasing threat of these hurricanes, which are only likely to become more frequent and likely more violent in the future. We also work with a lot of fishing communities as well in the territories, and it can be said that the turtle fisheries are also a threat. However, our experience is that these are mostly our artisanal fisheries that go out on day boats, variably in the morning and come back in the afternoon. And they're really targeting economically important fisheries such as lobster, Caribbean spiny lobster, queen conch fish, and they really have a small scale turtle fisheries. And this is just a map of the extent of turtle fisheries in the region. And those areas in green, that's where countries have completely prohibited turtle take. But if you think about Nicaragua, which takes 8,000 green turtles a year, these territories in the Caribbean are taking really tiny amounts. And while they're not economically important, these turtle fisheries, they're culturally important to the people. It is waning, that kind of relationship with turtles. It was something that was historically a lot stronger before kind of the globalization of food from the States came into the Caribbean, but it's still important to those communities, and their voices certainly need to be heard. And so that's kind of an overview of our turtles, basically, the kind of status and the extent and their threats in the Caribbean. And just going to talk a bit about our work and the kind of skills that and kind of services that we're bringing to the Caribbean territories to help them with their marine management needs. So yeah, essentially, as I said, our work really with turtles in the territories is to develop conservation plans, that look to protect these types of turtles, the larger size classes and breeding turtles, but definitely acknowledge cultural uses, economic uses of turtles in these islands, to acknowledge that and to develop plans, that kind of reflect community values too. And our projects are multidisciplinary. We provide the social science expertise, and we work with University of Exeter as well as local scientists. So in front of you on the left, that's Dr. Shannon Gore from the British Virgin Islands. She's a turtle scientist. And on the right-hand side is a fisher from one of the islands of the BVI called Anegada. And a lot of our work involves local scientists and the fishing community in actually carrying out the research in terms of it being transparent, and then trying to use the local knowledge of those resource users that use these resources, but to have them in the processes too. And so, as I said, with the science, I talked a bit about this before. We've been using this documentary film method called the community voice method. And we've used it in the Turks and Caicos to really good effect in this turtle project. And Reem, if you can remind me, I'll talk a bit about the impacts of this project in the Q&A. But essentially, it's all about filming local perspectives on a particular issues, like I said, and we invariably film about 30 people that form a cross section of society, and that kind of are related to a particular issue. So here we're filming somebody in the British Virgin Islands who strongly wants the protection of turtles in the islands. And at the same time, we interview people that have different values, such as fishers who've fished turtles for generations. And not only do we try and interview these two demographics, we try and open it up as well. We know that women have really incredible insights into this, and they need to be part of the solutions, as well as wider society and community champions. And essentially what we do, once we've filmed these 30 interviews about people talking about what they'd essentially want to see happen with the conservation of a species, we then transcribe everything, and then we analyze the data, and then we kind of see what themes are coming out, and then we try to incorporate them as fairly as possible into a film. And this is a recent film that we released for our turtle project in the British Virgin Islands, which is all about how can you balance conservation and culture. And then we then go back to the islands where we show this film at workshops. And essentially this is at the beginning, we have a scientific presentation, so the stakeholders are kind of aware of the results that have come from the kind of biological aspects of the project. Then we show the film, And then really this is where the magic happens. A lot of the times, these issues can be quite polarized, as we all know. And, you know, it could be perceived that particular issues, that there may be demographics that don't actually get on. But the way we do these films, we show that at the beginning of these films, everybody cares for the ocean. Everyone wants to see it managed. Everyone relies on the ocean, and we then start to see that we're actually emerging from the same ground, and that helps to kind of dissolve the polarities and actually get people to start talking and developing solutions like we have here in Montserrat. And then from these workshops, we then develop conservation action plans and recommendations that factor in, you know, community values, but also the scientific research. And then we submit recommendations. So we're about to submit recommendations on how the British Virgin Islands can support turtle conservation and turtle management. That should be done very soon. We're also lucky enough to have been involved in a project in Montserrat, which was led by the government of Montserrat and the University of Exeter. And we've already submitted recommendations. So we're very excited, hopefully, to see Montserrat having, you know, a really an updated and quite, I suppose, quite modern and cutting edge turtle conservation action plan, and, you know, for the region. In terms of next steps, you know, what's really good is that we can now expand our turtle work and use it working with local partners in the territories to start thinking about bigger habitats. And we've got a project that's funded by the Darwin Plus initiative by the UK government. It's led by the RSPB and the Turks and Caicos Islands National Trust. And there we're monitoring sea turtle habitats, as well as using the community voice method to kind of garner local opinion on how we can manage and protect the largest wilderness in the Caribbean, the uninhabited wilderness, which is East Caicos. So very exciting film coming up. And so I'm just coming to the end, and a lot of people do ask me, look, you know, what can we do? What can we do to support? So I would say, you know, please think about joining the Marine Conservation Society and donating to our overseas territory work. There's something you can do immediately right now, which is reduce, reuse, and cycle, and that will have a beneficial impact on our marine realm. And it's a summer. A lot of people have just come back from holidays, I imagine. And we've also got a resource on how to be turtle friendly while on holiday, and that's on our YouTube channel called Turtles in Trouble. So yeah, I just want to say that's the end. Thank you very much for hosting me, Reem, and and thank you all for listening to the presentation. I just wonder if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Amjit. That was fantastic. I mean, like, I really cannot emphasize how invaluable that kind of information is, but how fascinating the work is that you guys do. And I mean, of course, a huge well done to you, but also to the rest of the Marine Conservation Society for doing this incredibly important work. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I'm chairing this discussion and ask the first question. I wondered if you could tell me a bit more about these kind of community projects where you are engaging with the local community. Obviously, you can talk a bit more about, you know, the community voice methods, but I'm also really interested in how you sort of work with those local communities. You spoke about the fisheries, for example, and that, you know, a lot of the time these kind of turtle fisheries aren't economically important to the islands, but they are, you know, culturally and socially important to the people there. Yes. Especially as a result of, you know, free trade with the US, which means they don't necessarily need to produce it themselves. So how do you work with the communities, and how do you emphasize highlight the cultural importance over the economics?
That's a great question. And so when I started off at MCS, my actual role was actually based full-time in the Turks and Caicos Islands, in the fishing capital of South Caicos. So I have to really give credit to the Marine Conservation Society, Turks and Caicos Islands government, Duke University, and the University of Exeter, because it was really their methodology, which is all about immersing yourself into community, building trust with a fishing community that might initially be quite reluctant to engage on a turtle project, just because it divides societies, be it from the Caribbean and the West, you know, because we've got different ideas on how they should be managed. So that was it, really. It was me living in these communities, you know, full time for a couple of years, getting to know the fishers, which I'm happy to say a lot of them are really good friends. And you know, while you can be a researcher in these islands, I think I took it upon myself to kind of dissolve that line and get involved in you know, community activities. So, for example, joining a church band in the Turks and Caicos Islands, you know, getting involved in volunteering efforts, and you know, after a while, you start to become a member of the community, and after a while, people start opening up to you, and then you start to see what's actually happening. So that's kind of how I did the research, kind of anthropology type methods, and yeah, and that's also so when I was actually engaged with these communities, there was a lot of hesitance to work with me. So in the Turks and Caicos Islands, it's 2009, and the British government had taken over a direct rule at that point, because I think there was some mismanagement within the government. So it was quite a difficult time being not only a scientist from the UK, being in the Turks and Caicos, but also working on turtles. But the community voice method, you know, it's actually quite and for a lot of these fishers, they've never been engaged in policy processes. They've never been actually asked about their opinion regarding how a particular fishery should be managed. And maybe it's changed a lot now, but certainly back then, it was very powerful method. So when these fishers actually started to be encouraged and get involved in the filming, and then we actually showed this film, and it showed Turks Islanders talking about this issue, and not just Turks Islanders, but also people that from the wider Caribbean that live there, Haitian people, Dominicans. These communities saw actually, oh, these are our people, you know, and it helped to build trust, and that film actually helped me get a lot of trust, because a lot of those fishers were very hesitant to actually engage with me. But once they saw that film and they realized that they were being taken seriously and that their voices were being heard, we started to get a lot more participation. And now, you know, so that project resulted in recommendations to the TCO government on how to improve the turtle fishery, really trying to get protection for those larger size class turtles and that critically endangered species, the hawksbill turtle. That was in 2014, and I was in the Turks and Caicos last year, just evaluating how the turtle populations are doing there, and it's really interesting. Wherever I go now, the fishers are. It's really embedded in their psyche that you're not to take these large turtles. You should really focus on the smaller ones. So that's amazing, you know. And we're actually starting to see turtles nest in places where they haven't nested in recent memory. So this is really exciting, and it could be that we are starting to see the early signs of Turks and Caicos Islands nesting populations now recovering.
That's incredible. Sorry, there's other questions in the chat, but just to follow up on that, how do you know if those? I mean, how do you test if those species are actually nesting in the Turks and Caicos Islands? I mean, how do you test for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, so like a lot of the territory governments, they're under-resourced, they're widely stretched, and with the Turks and Caicos Islands, it's a huge wide archipelago, and a lot of the nesting beaches are remote on uninhabited islands. It's very hard to get there frequently to try and get a sense of, you know, accurate nesting densities. But what we do is we try and get to these beaches when we can with a lot of our local partners and the government officers. And essentially you're looking at turtle tracks, basically. And then from the turtle tracks, you can actually tell which species has actually nested, because the greens, the leatherbacks, the hawksbills have unique kind of nesting tracks. And then you can kind of tell from your eye if a turtle's nested, because it's got a classic look of a lot of dug up sand, and you can just get a sense of it, basically. And to kind of verify very sensitively and very carefully. Sometimes we dig, and if we do actually find turtle eggs there, that's the evidence, really. But we have been seeing you know, a lot of turtle nesting in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and turtles will invariably come back every 2 weeks. So once you start to see kind of a lot of activity, you can still see turtle tracks from a few weeks ago, and then you can kind of get a sense, okay, yeah, that something's happening here.
That's incredible. I mean, that's so fascinating. Thank you. We've got a question from the Honourable Claude Hogan in the chat from Montserrat. He said, "Thank you for your work with Exeter in Montserrat. Are your do you have any recommendations for legislation or policy or strategy? So, as a politician, what kind of strategies would you sort of try and implement to support that kind of conservation?"
Sure, and thanks for that question, Honourable Claude Hogan. Hope you're doing well. I think it's a while ago since we last met in Alderney. So the project, which is led by University of Exeter and Montserrat, that was all about developing a turtle action plan. And so we have submitted turtle fishery legislation, which is looking to update Montserrat's Turtle Act, and that is kind of still in the process. So unfortunately, I can't talk about that. And the action plan as well. So that's kind of focusing on having systematic monitoring happening of Montserrat's nesting turtles and the turtle populations in general. It's thinking about, with threats such as climate change, how can we look to mitigate them? Because a lot of those stunning beaches on Montserrat, especially on the west side, like Honourable Claude will know, woodlands beaches where they harbour quite a lot of turtle nests. Storms and hurricanes can totally wipe out those beaches, and that's it. You've lost those eggs. So I think the plan's really trying to see how we can kind of safeguard Montserrat's nesting turtle population for the future. As I say, it's still in kind of discussion and should be finalized very soon, and we'd be happy to share that with everybody here. But one thing that's really it's been quite amazing actually coming out of this project, that Montserrat, for a small island in the Caribbean, it has a regionally significant nesting turtle population. So we're thinking about up to 530 green turtle nests are laid there every year. So that kind of really adds the value and conservation value of Montserrat as well, and what it kind of contributes to the overall health of regional turtle populations.
That's incredibly interesting. Do you know what sort of timeline you have for that project, or are you not allowed to share any of that with us?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, we're in the kind of at the end now, basically, of our discussions with the Montserrat government, and will be hopefully that action plan will be finalized, and then it's up to the government of Montserrat really to put it, publicize it essentially, and to celebrate it, which they rightly should. So hopefully that can be done in the next few months. But if people are very interested in learning about the people of Montserrat, why they should visit there, then I've just put in the link, a link to the MCS website where you can actually watch the film that we did in Montserrat, which is all about gathering local views regards to turtle conservation. And then it's not just about turtle conservation; it's people talking about why they live in the places that they do, what they love about their islands and the territories, what the challenges are socially. And I've also put in the chat the film that we created in the BVI as well. So I'd certainly recommend people go and watch those.
Thank you for putting that out there, and we can always send those links around as well. Thank you, that's really helpful. We've got I guess from what you've said, Claude definitely has his work cut out for him as a result of the project. So from Ben, he said, "Thank you for the talk and for your work. A quick question: how do you go about measuring actual impact from projects like these ones, or the impacts due to emergent recommendations? Can it be hard to detach any observed changes from other concurrent processes, etc.?"
Sure, that's a really good question. So I think if you look at the community voice method, at those workshops, we have like feedback sessions afterwards where we try and get a sense of, what was the community's experience of that event, and that's been a really good guide of like what's working and what's not working, and the impact. And I think one thing is, if you're able to deliver on your project, and you're able to with the government of the Caribbean territories, develop these recommendations and ambitious action plans for such species, I think that can be also impactful as well. But like I say, I kind of said previously, with the territories being quite stretched, it can be difficult to kind of have that systematic monitoring, to have real true sense of the impacts of the work, and that's always going to be difficult. So if I look at the Turks and Caicos Islands, and when we did that evaluation work there last year, as I said, I was on the fishing docks, and the turtle fishery has really contracted compared to what it was, a decade ago. I was interviewing not only the fishers, but the community members, conservationists, other fishers, and there was a real sense that, not only turtle landings were reducing, but those large turtles, often breeding turtles, often those that are nesting in the Turks and Caicos Islands, they were rarely caught, hardly caught. People couldn't actually remember when these turtles had last been caught, and that's impact, especially going in there in 2008 and seeing how the turtle fishery was operating. I think if you look at Turks and Caicos, where there's this legislation's come in, fishers are now committing and working towards catching the sustainable sizes. Those larger turtles aren't being caught, and you're starting to see, nesting levels increase. Yeah, you're right. You can't say with 100% certainty that this is due to it, but I think you can kind of join the dots, as it were, and you can kind of say, yes, this does seem to be working. And I think, Ben, yeah, that there have been other concurrent processes. So in the Turks and Caicos, you've huge levels of tourism that have happened, and there's a real demand now for other economically important fisheries such as conch and queen lobster. A lot of those turtle fishermen that I used to work with 15 years ago are saying, we're just simply not interested in turtles. There's more demand for the tourist markets that want, queen conch and lobster as well. So there are these other processes that are kind of happening, but necessarily doesn't mean that it's always going to be positive for the turtles. We're in this shifting ecosystem. There's massive change happening, especially in the Caribbean region. So that's why we need that kind of like long-term monitoring.
Yeah, I guess that's particularly interesting for those sort of long-term projects, because you've got to be monitoring the way that those ecosystems are changing in the long term. So that's particularly interesting. Ben also says, is the Marine Conservation Society doing or planning any further work in the overseas territories, perhaps as part of or beyond the involvement or contributions to the Great Blue Ocean Coalition, which he believes the MCS is a part of? Is the MCS part of the Blue Ocean Coalition?
Yes, the Great Blue Ocean Coalition.
Fantastic.
And just so yeah, that's a really good question, Ben. And just so everyone's aware, the Great Blue Ocean Coalition is made up of 6 UK-based NGOs. We were initially called the Great British Ocean Coalition, and we work with the UK government and specifically their Blue Belt programme, which is all about enhancing marine protection and management across the whole of the UK overseas territories globally. And we kind of work on the Caribbean aspect. And so our work through the Great Blue Oceans, where we've lobbied UK government to send resource and expand the Blue Belt program to the Caribbean, is having a lot of impact. Last year, the Turks and Caicos Islands joined the Blue Belt program, the first Caribbean territory to join the Blue Belt, which is fantastic news. Anguilla have joined the program earlier this year. And if you go onto Twitter and you go onto the Blue Belt program's Twitter page, you'll see that they're in the Cayman Islands now. They're running a workshop all about what Cayman Islands priorities are for the Blue Belt. And this is actually once in a generation funding, really, because the territories, I've said a few times, they are overstretched. They've got huge ocean spaces to deal with, and simply just the threats. They just don't have the capacity. You know, how would you deal with a Category 5 hurricane? You know, if you're a small island state, and so the Blue Belt program is you know, incredible opportunity to support these territory departments, given the resources that they rightly deserve and need. There's a lot of manpower on offer. There's also a lot of technical support that the Blue Belt is providing. And so, yeah, this is really important. And we kind of work at that interface between the Caribbean territory governments and the UK government, trying to advise and lobby and support communications. And in terms of like our other future work, I think one thing that we've seen with the community voice method projects in the Caribbean territories is that fishermen repeatedly saying that they don't feel part of general fishery management processes in the island. They don't feel like their fisheries are valued. You know, a fisherman back in, let's say, 20 or 30 years ago, they had a really high status in some of these Caribbean territories of, you know, the providers of food. And now that's kind of really plummeted, and it's often in places seen as a last resort, really. And so there's this real need not only to try and raise fishers and support their organization and capacity building, but have them actually properly involved in not only fishery management processes, but also ocean conservation processes as well. So that's kind of the direction of our work, really, you know, which is evolved from our current work in the territories.
And how do you get the fishermen involved, or at least the fisheries, you know, as an industry as a whole? How do you get them involved with conservation? I mean, how does that work? And how, you know, if they're not necessarily on board with the same, you know, types of actions that you're doing with the larger and wider conservation projects, how do you get them involved with that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think not only do we kind of situate ourselves in these islands and get to know the fishery industry, but we're actually, you know, we're not against fishing. We think fishing is hugely important in these territories, like the fishermen tell us. You know, on the back of the COVID-19 pandemic and you know, regular hurricanes, food security is vital to these islands, and fisheries are really important to that. And I think through the community voice method, where we take this common shared values approach, where all values and opinions are listened to, and once people, even those from the fisheries sector, start to see that their kind of ideas, values, needs are actually being represented in the outputs, the recommendations, that really helps to build trust. A lot of our work is with the departments of the government, of the territory governments too. So in Montserrat, I was working with the Fisheries and Ocean Governance Unit. We just got back from a trip in the BVI, working with the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, who are just an incredible department, you know, and without them, we wouldn't have got access to the fishers. So we're also kind of building on their relationships that these departments have as well. And I think through the methods and having open lines of communications, transparency, as being honest as possible, I think that starts to help build the trust as well.
That's fascinating. Thank you. And R. William Thornton from FOTBOT says, have you had any cooperation with other governments in the Caribbean in regard to turtle conservation?
It's a good question. Trying to think now. So, yes, William. So, we've done a lot of satellite tracking of turtles. In the Turks and Caicos Islands, we satellite tagged a huge female green turtle that a local fisherman called Susie. We stuck a satellite tracker on her, and she did a 6,000-kilometer migration that went through many different Caribbean island range states, including the British Virgin Islands and Anguilla. And there's a regional mechanism for turtle conservation in the Caribbean, and through that, you know, we were working, or at least informing government officials, conservationists, that, hey, you know, we're having these turtles come into your water. So that's kind of one way that we've been working with other governments. But you're right, it is a shared resource. Certainly, we do need to be working collaboratively with other island states, and a lot of the recommendations that we actually develop, they're not novel measures. They're actually being used in other parts of the Caribbean. So we're taking learning as well from other turtle fisheries in the Caribbean too. So I think, yeah, we're in touch with a lot of the turtle scientists, sharing learning, be it on a biological basis, be it on kind of social sciences. And I think through these regional structures and conferences, we can get together now and again and share our expertises and support collaboration. I hope that's makes sense.
That's particularly interesting. So it sounds like it's a combination of sort of sharing best practices with experts that have already been working on these kind of issues, but also taking advantage of those pre-existing relationships with communities that those particular governments, but also those particular experts have already established. So it's not as though you are sort of coming in and taking over these kind of conservation projects, but actually you're developing pre-existing relationships that have already sort of been around, so that you're then obviously going to obviously get the most efficient sort of strategy out of that in a way. Is that sort of a good summary of like the kind of strategy?
Yeah, exactly. Like I say, we've been working in the Caribbean territories for over 20 years. A lot of those people that we initially worked with are still in positions now. And they've been vital parts of our work, in getting not only consent from the governments, but supporting trusts with our stakeholders and getting recommendations passed. And through them, the region's quite small. We have been able to get connections, but also support their capacity as well and connect turtle researchers in these territories to the wider Caribbean and support their capacity building. So, for example, we've took advantage of the Darwin Fellowship, which is a fund that supports, I think it's master's level studies for people from the UK territories, and so that's another thing that we've also done as well.
That's really interesting. How long has that project been around for?
That's a good question. The Darwin Fellowship has it's been around for so many years, and one thing that I keep hearing from a lot of people that are closely connected to it that it's actually really underused.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And how do you accept applicants?
Right. So I think if you were to go onto the Darwin Plus website and the Darwin Fellowship, there's guidance there. So I think MCS, we kind of acted as maybe sponsors or hosts of a student, and the universities are also key partners. So I think we use the University of Exeter, where we have one a Montserratian woman, Vita Wade, who's actually there right now doing her master's. So I think it's a combination of an organization that can support the students, almost be like a sponsor of sorts, and having a university as well. But if anyone's interested, do go onto the Darwin Plus website and look up the Darwin Fellowship. It's a really great initiative, and I recommend people take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be many of the people listening now, but also our members that would be particularly interested in that. So thank you. We're coming to the end now. Just to finish off, I want you to talk maybe just a little bit about why these kind of conservation projects are so important and so vital to the British Overseas Territories. Could you tell me a little bit, just in general, why conservation is so important?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know if everyone knows, but I think 94% of our unique biodiversity of the UK actually resides in the UK overseas territories. A lot of these are small islands which are biodiversity hotspots in the main, but they're also susceptible to a lot of threats. Be it from climate change, be it from pollution, disease, invasive species. And from my time being there, you've got this incredible marine wealth, really precious marine wildlife that reside in these incredible places, and at the same time you've got just these fascinating communities that have had these relationships with the sea and with nature for a very long time. And in my experience, the seas are fundamental to the Caribbean OTs, not just for their blue economy, but for a sense of themselves. It's in the psyche and the lifeblood of the people. Often you go to these territories and you hear about island culture, and something just clicks, and you see that the communities, and the healthy marine environment, they're interlinked. So I think it's vital that we support the territories in managing their incredible biodiversity, not just for the biodiversity, but for food security, for the blue economy, be it tourism. We're in a situation now where climate breakdown, and I think the territories are a real part in the solution by showing the way in terms of managing and protecting their blue, for example, blue carbon habitats. So yeah, that's from my experience. It's absolutely vital, and we need to do all that we can for our friends in the territories.
That's fantastic. And if we want to, keep up to date with what the Marine Conservation Society are up to, how can we do that?
Sure. So we're very active on social media. So we've got an Instagram, Facebook, and a Twitter site. So do check out that. I'll happily share details of that. And we've also got, I'll just share actually our web page. So we've actually got a UK Overseas Territories web page. People can go on that and check out a bit about our different projects. We also do blogs and experiences of our field trips, and we're also going to be having another community voice method film coming out of Anguilla.
Oh, so wonderful!
I'll happily share that with you as well, Reem, when you can get that out. But yeah, a lot of our outputs are on the website and also on social media as well.
That is amazing. Amdeep, thank you so much. That's Amdeep from the Marine Conservation Society. You are absolutely incredible. The work that you guys do is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today and let us know a little bit about the fantastic work that you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you, Reem.
Going to do my job as the events coordinator and update you all also on our upcoming events at FOTBOT. Many of you joined us last Thursday at the College of Arms evening tour and supper. That was great. I think most of us had really enjoyed that event, and it was great to sort of see the impact that sort of the College of Arms itself has sort of had in the overseas territories, and with the development of those particular arms as well. On the 2nd of October, those of you that are at the Conservative Party conference will be having a reception there. On the 28th of October, we have a northern reception in the lovely city of York. And on the 30th of November, our big event of the year, the Christmas gala dinner. So please do attend if you guys are around in London as well. That should be a fantastic event. If you want any more details about our future events towards the end of this year, then just go onto the website. It'll be under the events tab and you can check those out. Thank you so much, Amdeep, and thank you to everybody who came along to this event. The recording will of course be on various different podcast apps, so if you would like to re-listen, then you can obviously have a look at that as well. Thank you, Amdeep, and thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you, Reem. Thanks everyone for your time.